Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Let's go around and say our names. My name is Jim.
Mark.
George.
Howard.
Paul. Snake. David.
Peter. David. Steve.
David. Peter.
Paul.
David. We have patriarchs then.
Carl.
No, not this.
My name is Jim.
Mike. Jack.
And Roger.
That could be David or Jim
Who would you like to be today?
or Paul. Actually, my full name is, with my Roman Catholic and my Tibetan Buddhist initiations, my full name is Roger Jonathan Gregory Benedict Hlundup Tashi Corless. So that's enough, isn't it?
And your nickname is Dharma Daddy.
Yes. And I'm not wearing the Dharma Daddy t-shirt today, though. Which, those of you who know, I sometimes wear the Dharma Daddy t-shirt which says, "You're a bad boy, go to my room."
As most of you know, Roger is an eminent Buddhist scholar. He's a professor emeritus of Buddhism and Christianity at Duke, and he's a writer and teacher of note, and our local embodiment of the Bodhi Rascal spirit. And thank you for coming.
All right, thank you. A couple of announcements if you want to hear me again, if this is good. Then next Saturday, I shall be leading a one-day retreat at the Sati Center. That's S-A-T-I, which is the Pali word for mindfulness. And that's run by Gil Fronsdal, who is a specialist in Theravada. And that's from 9 to 5, and it's going to be called Being Queer and Buddhist. How is it possible? Probably most of you in this room have either worked that out or have decided it isn't worth asking. But even so, you might find some interest in. We go into some of the history and the presuppositions, and there'll be meditation and time for discussion, and I think there's going to be lunch. I have flyers if someone would want one afterwards, and admission is by donation, so whatever you can afford.
Roger?
Yes.
For those of us who won't be able to make it because it's also the first day of Rosh Hashanah, are you going to tape it?
I have no idea. I imagine they do. Does anyone know if they tape things at the Sati Center? You can't be mindful if you don't tape because you can't remember. Because the word Sati is also meaning to remember, isn't it? So how can you remember if it is not being taped? That is my Indian persona. I am called Raja in I think that's the way I'm looking for ways to make extra money in my retirement. And perhaps I will be one guru. But if you are one guru, you must be talking more slowly, with many pauses, because then it is sounding much more profound, isn't it? Well, so I'll ask them. I mean, they sometimes ask, is it okay to tape? And I said yes. Because what I'll be saying is nothing really copyrighted, but I'll let people know then if that's the case. Or you can contact the Sati Center. It's probably www.sati.org or something. Anyhow, I'll give you a flyer afterwards, and then you can go work from there. Then there was a kind of move to have me talk here a bit more often. I suppose you like jokes or something. And so I was asked by Clint, who's not here, if I could talk next month. And so I picked October 26th of the 2 dates he gave me. And since that would have been my father's birthday, if he'd been alive, he'd be over 100 by now if he was, but he died at 98. I will try to say something on the attitude of the Dharma towards parents. See if we can see something there that is valuable about having parents. Many of us, especially if we're gay, wondered why we got the mother we got. Anyhow, that's for later. And today, I picked up on something that I heard when I was listening to a Dharma talk by somebody else here, and I think it was when Jim asked the question, is there a personality in the room when I'm doing Buddhist meditation? And what about the personality of the Buddha? And I thought, well, that's a very important point to bring up, because my impression is that in Asia, the personality of the Buddha is very obvious. It's very much in the forefront. But then in elite Buddhism, as we would call this in the West, this kind of Buddhism is elite, in which the majority of the faces are white in the audience, or congregation or whatever, and we're mostly reasonably well off. I mean, they may not be really rich, but some of us might be, and we're doing all right. And we come into Buddhism as something different, because if we just wanted to be religious, we'd go to church, you see. But it's a bit different to come to this and see what it's all about. And then very often, if anything happens in a situation like this that seems religious, that we do have actually a statue of the Buddha, and we have lights around him now. So, and I think that's really important. It sets, to me, the tone of this. But some people feel that anything like worshipping or bowing, lighting incense, or getting into touch with the Buddha as a person would be, that's the stuff that we had in the Christian stuff, and I've left all that. I don't want that, because I didn't like it. If you don't like it, that's all right. I mean, I'm not here to convince you that it's a good thing, but I think that what happens sometimes is that we pick up on aspects of the Buddhist tradition which make it rather insipid. At least it was to me, and I had to figure out that there was something wrong with the way that I was being taught Buddhism the way that I was understanding how I was being taught Buddhism, perhaps that's better to say, in Western Buddhist centers, especially insight meditation centers, to a lesser extent in Zen centers. And I moved into the Tibetan tradition and into Pure Land, partly because I missed something. I found that the way I understood the insight meditation and Zen center teaching that I was given, and I want to put it in this way, the way I understood it, because I'm not sure that it was intended to be this way, it came out as it was a philosophy with bells, or a philosophy, but you couldn't do it in a chair. You had to sit on the floor or something, take your shoes off. But it was still philosophy, and the emphasis was on wisdom, and you would get this big enlightenment, and then you would see that there was nothing there, because that was the essence of the Buddhist tradition and Buddhist enlightenment. And I would personally, if that was what Buddhism was all about, I think I'd be in a bar getting drunk right now, because it'd be much more fun. But it turns out that there is an essential part of the Buddhist tradition which speaks of the person of the Buddha. After all, Buddhism is a founded religion, at least in historical time. It's not like Hinduism, which, not being founded, you might say is unfounded, but anyhow, there's no particular person who started off the Hindu tradition or traditions. And in the Buddhist self-understanding, it goes back to the beginning of this world cycle and before. But nevertheless, we can identify within the continuum that we would call Newtonian Cartesian space-time, a person whom we know as Buddha, who lived at a particular time in a particular place, and those times and places have been identified with a fair amount of accuracy, not with complete precision, but within a reasonable amount of accuracy, within 100 years or so. 6th century BCE, before the Common Era. Do you know what I mean when I say CE and BCE? That doesn't confuse you? Yes. And in the northeast of the subcontinent of India. Please do not say, I think I've said this before, but it bears saying again, that the Buddha was born in India, or the Buddha was Indian. India is a political reality which is a fairly recent creation, the Republic of India. And as the boundaries have now been drawn, the political boundaries have now been drawn, the traditional birthplace of the Buddha is in the Kingdom of Nepal. And you only want to say that the Buddha was Indian once in the presence of a Nepali to remember that it was wrong. Because it's a point of national pride. The Buddha was not one Indian, he was one Nepali, isn't he? He wasn't actually that. Because he came from a place that's called Magadha, which is no longer on the map as an entity. So it's somewhat odd if we don't mention the person. And the person, as we recover him through this technique called historical criticism, and I call it a technique, it's an academic enterprise, an exercise to do this thing called history. And as those of you who know my book, The Vision of Buddhism, know that I have some problems with people who only focused on the history of Buddhism, and I spend some time berating my learned colleagues who emphasize the history of Buddhism, and it did actually spark a reaction in a 17-page rounding denunciation in one of the major professional journals of religion. And this came just at the time when my promotion at that university back east was unsure, because people didn't know much about the field, didn't know if I was well known, and suddenly I'm being roundly denounced in the major publication that they all read. Oh, well, he must be well known then. And so I got the promotion. So I told the author, with whom I'm on friendly terms, we have the author of that, she has a very different approach to Buddhism. Her approach is, I respect it a whole lot. She's come up with all kinds of really interesting stuff, but she doesn't do it the way I do it, and we, at a professional level, we just don't talk to each other, but at an ordinary level we do. Anyhow, I say thank you very much for that. But history it's a way of understanding. Space and time in Buddhism are regarded as conditional. Alter the conditions, and space and time will be different. Sometimes we say something took a long time, something took a short time, but it seems to be the same time on the watch. In Buddhism, we would say, well, actually, it maybe did take a long time or a short time, because you're in a different time-space continuum. And this is this a wristwatch or something like it is really just a machine for the production of minutes and seconds. It doesn't actually measure anything. This isn't my idea. It was mentioned by Lewis Mumford that the invention of the clock was a way to produce minutes and seconds. And if we all had the same thing, we could always say, well, we'll meet at the same time and place. And if you don't have it, you can't do that. So in some parts of the world where they don't have clocks, they meet kind of whenever, when the sun is at a certain point, or they change the time so that it's always 6 o'clock at dawn. In some parts of Africa, where they're mostly Muslim, they alter the clock so that they start at dawn. At 6 o'clock is when dawn starts, because that's when you stay pressed. So one shouldn't be too hypnotized by space and time, and that's why I refer to the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni, as the Buddha for our continuum. So when we do this exercise on unconditioned reality and we condition it in the way that historians do, we do come up with an individual called Siddhartha Gautama Shakyamuni, Buddha, Tathagata, etc. He referred to himself mostly as Bhagwan. The Bhagwan is a word meaning the Blessed One or something like that, we normally say in English. The person who is fortunate, or and it's used for a whole lot of teachers in the Indian subcontinent. So we come up with a certain individual, and apparently this individual was very attractive. Was not just kind of a milksop kind of person who was just a philosopher and very, very cold. In fact, there is a report in the Pali text. It's not often referred to, but you can find it. I don't know exactly the reference. I'd have to look up in my library when I get home if someone really wants the reference. But it's a reference which is of interest to a group like this. There was a young man who saw the Buddha preaching and was enraptured by his appearance. He just thought, this guy is so sexy. And so he hung around him a lot and became a monk and was always staring at him. Oh, he's so sexy. And it's interesting that the Buddha didn't say, don't look at me like that. He said, well, don't look just at the form, but listen to what I say and practice the teaching. And so he accepted the fact that we would say today the man was gay, I suppose, but they didn't have the word then. But anyhow, just you use this energy to say, well, here I will attract, I will listen. Because if you see some man that you think really hot, whatever he says, you hang on his words. You listen and remember everything, phone number, everything. You remember it. So if the Buddha comes and he's so hot, you remember what he says. Huh? So apparently he was quite hot. All right. So the Buddha was hot, right? So he wasn't just, oh, well, I'm a philosopher. No, I don't do this kind of thing. So then we get a lot in the literature of meditating on the form of the Buddha. Oh, by the way, he wasn't little and fat. There are some people who see this image of the fat entity, the fat guy, and they say that's the fat Buddha, laughing Buddha or something. And often the only thing that people know about Buddhism, or think they know, is that if you rub the belly of the fat Buddha, you get lucky. Well, actually that is the figure of some hippie monk who was a bit out of it. I mean, he wandered about in China in all kinds of weather. He went in monastic robes, but he didn't really put them around properly. I mean, he ate too much. We shouldn't eat it, as a monk shouldn't eat too much. And he was always kind of talking to himself, laughing and giggling, and didn't mind whether it was hot or cold. And he collected all kinds of stuff, junk, and he put it in a big bag, which was a hemp bag. Didn't smoke the hemp as far as we know, but it was put it in the hemp bag, and so he was known as the hemp bag, as the hemp bag monk, and he called it the bag of wonderful things. And when he came into the village, all the kids would come and say, "Oh, we want to see the wonderful things." He'd bring out all the bits of junk, which would become toys to the children. So after he died, people said, maybe he was the Bodhisattva Maitreya, who's the next Buddha to come, who will emphasize love. Despite the fact that Buddha Shakyamuni was hot, he emphasized wisdom rather than love or compassion. The story is. So anyhow, he wasn't a Buddha. The form of the Buddha is always done very particularly to show what is regarded as the perfect form. I mean, the head bump and all that. These are all parts of the. These are physical characteristics of the great person, the Mahapurusha, in the Indian subcontinent tradition. If you see a guy with a head bump and all that, you know this is either a great king or a Buddha, someone like that. So he's had a perfect form. He had the gait of a lion. No, the gait of the bear, the voice of the lion, the waist of a gazelle, I think. I mean, all kind of these kind of characteristics that you would think would be good to have. So something like the Visuddhimagga, which is the path to purity or path of purification, it can be both, which is the major compendium for the practice of Theravada Buddhism. There's a section on recollection, or sati, S-A-T-I, what I just mentioned, and there's a section on buddhanusati, the recollection of the Buddha, and it goes into great detail about visualizing the golden skin, the elegant eyes, the tongue, and everything, and the legs, and the rest. Although you wouldn't see everything, he would be wording things. But you go through all this thing, and then you get a feeling of being in the presence of somebody very attractive. Now, the Theravada tradition is that after giving all the teaching, the Buddha passed away or disappeared. We often use the word passed away in English, meaning that a person died. But in the Buddhist tradition, if you die, you get reborn again. So officially, the Buddha didn't die because he wasn't reborn, but he passed away. He disappeared into Nibbana, or that's the Pali form of the Sanskrit Nirvana. And then, where is he now? It is not correct to say that the Buddha is around still in some eternal state in heaven, but it is not also not correct to say he has gone into nothingness. All we can say is the Buddha is not around, and this question came up later in a really helpful text called the Milinda Panya. A lot of the texts in the Pali are suttas, they're teachings of the Buddha, which they tend to go on, and they have lots of things happening, and you think, well, what's the point here? Some time after the Buddha's passing, there was, at least in theory, it was put in a book, and it may have happened in fact, there was a debate between a king of the northwest subcontinent, whose name probably was Menander, M-E-N-A-N-D-E-R, and he was one of the descendants of the Alexandrian thing that happened where, Alexander came from Macedonia. He was the first hippie who wanted to go to India to learn about philosophy, but since he was a king, he didn't just get into the microbus and drive out there. He conquered all the way, which took longer, but made him more famous. And when he got there, he didn't really think he got what he was looking for. But anyhow, he left behind a legacy of the Hellenistic or the Greek culture, and that is reflected in a lot of the Buddhist artwork, especially from the northwest of an Indian subcontinent. If you go to the Art Museum here in San Francisco and see some of the early Buddhist art from the northwest of the Indian subcontinent, it looks pretty Greek, and that's because of this influence. And there are even some coins which have the word Buddha in Greek written on it at that time. So this is a Socratic dialogue between King Menander and a Buddhist monk called Nagasena, army of snakes being extremely wise. And in the book he's called Milinda, because it's put into the Pali text, M-I-L-I-N-D-A. So the Milinda Panya, which is available in English, Questions of King Milinda, is a series of Socratic dialogues in which King Milinda says, how can this be so? This is no good. And Nagasena says, well, how about so-and-so? How about so-and-so? And eventually the king says, oh, you're right, yes. So it's the ordinary thing you find in the dialogues of Plato, in which you have a fall guy and then you have Socrates. And here the king is the fall guy, and the bhikshu is the Socrates. I mention this because it's something that we might actually want to have a look at sometime later on if we have a study session. It's a very helpful text because it's very clear and very much to the point. It isn't at all perplexing. It doesn't go on forever. It gets to the point quickly, which I will now do with this. That the king says to the Venerable Nagasena, where is the Buddha? And he says, the Buddha has passed into final Nibbana. And so he says, can the Buddha be pointed out as being here or there? Here or there. And Nagasena says, no, he cannot be pointed out as being here or there. But he can be pointed out Dhamma Kayena and Sangha Kayena. He can be pointed out by means of the body of the teaching, the Dhamma, and by means of the body of the community, the Sangha. So that when one meets the community, the Sangha, the monks and the nuns, one is meeting the Buddha in some way. And when one reads or hears the Dhamma, the teaching, one is meeting the Buddha in some way, because Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha are interdependent with each other. When the Buddha passed away into final Nirvana, he said, I am now to pass away, and you must now take the Dhamma as your refuge and the Sangha as your refuge. By the way, he didn't say, take yourselves as refuge in the modern understanding of yourselves. It's yourselves in the precise understanding, in the plural. The problem is in English we use the word you now for both singular and plural, except if you're from New England and you speak the Quaker language, and when you're very precise to say thee, when you want to mean one person, because you want to be plain, right? He didn't say take thyself as refuge and be thyself on thine own. He said take yourselves as refuge, all of you, and the Dhamma. So this idea that there's still a presence of the Buddha in some way, not only in the rather abstract teaching, but also in the person of individuals where you meet a practitioner, is expanded in the Mahayana, because the Mahayana takes a different view of the Buddha, a view which I think is a little more profound, but it's not significantly different from that in Theravada. The difference between Theravada and Mahayana has been overemphasized because one side or the other has been playing politics to try to get people on their side. It's like Chevrolet and Ford. You overemphasize the virtues of Chevrolet if you're a Chevrolet dealer and downplay the virtues of the Ford, and the other way around. But basically, when you get in them, they both have a steering wheel and a gas pedal and whatever. So there's not that much of a difference. So what happens in the Mahayana, the notion of Dhammakaya, in the Pali, Dhammakaya, Dhammakaya, which means literally, I would say, the body of the teaching, the corpus of the text, in a sense, is expanded to mean, and it is put into the Sanskrit for convenience, although no one speaks Sanskrit in the Mahayana, Dharmakaya. That they would speak it in Chinese, say fasen or something. And the word dharma there is taken in an expanded sense of not just the teaching about reality, but the reality itself, the way reality really is. Ultimately, the Buddha's teaching is really about that, about trying to wake us up to the real way real reality really is, and not the way we fantasize that reality is. We fantasize reality as particulate, divided, divisive, proceeding along a timeline, extended in space, something you've got to work with, it's suffering, sometimes joyful a little bit, then back to suffering again, and on, repetitive. This is all something that we made up. It's a story we made up, and we can't simply stop the tape. It takes a long time to figure out really what is exactly going on. So it's almost, the Mahayana is almost saying reality as it is Buddha. It's not quite saying that, but it comes very, very close to saying that, because it says we're getting into touch with the Dharmakaya, the entity of reality. Another word that's used is Tathagata Garbha. The word Garbha means an embryo, and what contains the embryo, which is the womb. And a Tathagata is just $1 million word for Buddha. It's a more formal word for Buddha. So Tathagata Garbha means that the world is the matrix, the womb of the Buddha, where the Buddha lives, or it has Buddha-ness in it as little embryos that are coming out. The only word I know in English that combines the notions of embryo and womb in the way the Sanskrit word garbha does is the word egg, because we can think of a chicken egg or something. But to say that the world is a Buddha egg, it seems a little odd. So I think we stick with Tathagata Garbha. And this is a very important teaching in the Mahayana, that the world is alive with compassion and wisdom and energy, which is that of the Buddha. And then this compassion and wisdom and energy, because it is wise, it knows everything. So it's very clear. Wisdom in Buddhism is almost the same thing as total clarity. And as we proceed on the path of the Buddha, we should find that our thinking clears up. We get less liable to go round in circles and think would have, could have, should have, if not, and what if I say that and he says that, does he mean that and I mean this, and what's going on? We get into position, into a mental state where we can see clearly what is happening, and we can express ourselves clearly. We don't say, well, I don't know, No, we say what we mean, because we know what we mean, and it's very clear. This wisdom of Buddhism is finally indescribable, but it doesn't mean that it's something where we just remain dumb. There is a Zen saying about this: one who speaks 40 blows of the stick. Okay, well, you think, all right, the true Dharma is silent, doesn't say a thing. One who does not speak 40 blows of the stick, how would you answer? So, there's also compassion, and wisdom and compassion are equal in the Buddhist tradition, in the Buddha mind. If a teacher has developed his or her wisdom at the expense of the compassion, they would not be regarded as helpful as one who had developed compassion equally, because the wisdom mind can say, I know you're going to crash your car. I can see it happening. Oh, look, it happened and he died. Oh, well, I knew all about that. But compassion says, I want to do something about that. Can I help? Can I help? Or if a child is about to run out into the road, wisdom says, oh, a child is about to be squashed. It's a very bad thing, but it's going to happen, But compassion goes out and tries to catch the child. And both in the Pali and the Mahayana texts, they say the Buddha sees all living beings, as a mother sees her only child, which means that the Buddha has this spontaneous compassion. And I've been told also that when we have a moment of clarity and we see great wisdom or great emptiness, at that moment we also see great compassion. And that would mean that if we've had an authentic enlightenment in that clear wisdom, then we spontaneously become helpful and compassionate. And so, if the true essence of the Buddha, true mind of the Buddha, is this Dharmakaya, the wisdom and compassion, it cannot remain in an ethereal kind of realm. It must come towards us. It's not a question of me trying to get up to enlightenment, though that might be part of it, but it's also the Buddha is coming down to see me because he cannot help himself. It's a question of could the Buddha stop being compassionate? Well, only if he wasn't a Buddha, as far as I can see. So the Buddha automatically comes towards, and that happens to all of us. When we become Buddhas and attain to the Dharmakaya, we spontaneously manifest Sambhogakaya, which is this glorious form of the deities, and then the Nirmanakaya, which is the human form, and so as to be helpful to all beings. And the Nirmanakaya can be any form at all. Even in some texts, there's a Nishyandakaya in which the Buddha becomes an object. So that if the only way that you can be taught about the Dharma is to run up against a brick wall, the Buddha becomes a brick wall. And oh, I get it now. Yes. So this means that when I'm practicing, if I'm emphasizing the fullness of the Buddha mind, I am experiencing the Buddha coming to me as much as I'm experiencing a movement towards the Buddha. And a short text written in China, we think, because it has the name of Ashvaghosha on it, but it's too short to be Indian. It doesn't go on and on. It's very clear. Called in English, The Awakening of Faith in the Mahayana. So I say it's only in the Chinese, so we don't think it was written in Sanskrit. Da Chang Qi Xian Long, and it is in English now, a couple of translations. That says, how can we possibly have a notion of enlightenment if we're all ignorant, and if everything is suffering and everything is ignorant? How do I have a notion? It couldn't be, I'm stuck. But it says that enlightenment, or the enlightened mind, perfumes this reality. It mysteriously perfumes. And the Dharma Dhatu, which is another word for this mind, mysteriously moves towards us. And then this is also taken to term, I think, in the Tibetan tradition, and some forms of the Zen tradition you'll find a variant of this, especially in the Tibetan tradition, where when one takes the refuges in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, one also takes refuge in the Lama, in the teacher. And it's quite important to notice that although they say 4 refuges, they don't mean 4 distinct refuges. There are only the 3 refuges in all of Buddhism. There isn't a 4th refuge. Well, in the Tantric, you get refuge in some of the other. But anyhow, in ordinary Buddhism, there's only 3 refuges. And the 4th one of the Lama is just the embodiment of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha for you. Because the word Lama is evocative. So if I were to be your Lama, I couldn't say, oh, I am a Lama. You must address me as Lama. And a teacher can be a monk, or doesn't have to be a monk, or a nun, doesn't have to be. So that means that if you pick a particular individual, after extensive testing, and if you are looking for a Lama, please note that the tradition says, test extensively, and if you're not sure, if you feel weird, don't do it. Only when you feel very safe. It's a bit like falling in love and saying, on the first date, let's move in. Then, oh, that was a big mistake. So test the guy for a couple of years, see what happens, and go for that. Then you will find, then you take that person as your teacher, and then you see, this is the teaching of the Buddha is not just an impersonal thing. It has this personal aspect, and I can go and talk to them, and they're concerned for me, and they should have the attitude of the Buddha himself. And I remember talking to Geoffrey Hopkins, who is a well-known scholar of Tibetan Buddhism, and he said, when I went in to see this particular Rinpoche, I felt so honored and nurtured because I just felt that I was his favorite student, and he loved me the best of all. But then I realized he's that way with everybody. So he didn't think to him. Okay, there's a couple of minutes left, I think, if we have any time for questions. You think there's a couple of questions? Yes.
Can you explain again? I mean, it's complicated, but just briefly. You talked about the Dharmakaya Buddha. There's 3 versions of that too, isn't there? Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya, or something like that. What is that distinction about? How does that relate to what you were talking about?
The distinction, the first distinction is into 2. The Dharmakaya refers to the formless form, if you like, the aspect of reality as it truly is, or true mind as it truly is, which is unconditioned, and therefore has no place, no form. It doesn't have beginning or end. It has, in effect, it has no qualities, and you can say nothing about it except that it is, and in a sense that's also wrong. But if you say nothing, then of course we think that there's nothing. So we say it is, and then we say, well, it doesn't exist inherently. But that is the ultimate form, and that is especially the wisdom form is emphasized when that is talked of. But it then automatically, spontaneously, it will manifest, and that word is Rupakaya, R-U-P-A, Rupakaya, which means the form body. And that is the body that has physical location, a form, and whatever. Then that is normally divided up into 2. The Sambhogakaya, S-A-M-B-H-O-G-A-K-A-Y-A, the body of enjoyment, or the something. It's difficult to make any sense of these in Sanskrit, so most of the time I don't bother translating them. That is the form that is suitable for the deities. It's the one that has all the marks and the signs, as we see in the statues. It is normally said to be really gigantic, the size of the cosmic mountain, or many times the size of the cosmic mountain, as large as the number of sands in grains of sand in the Ganges times the size of the cosmic mountain, something just really big. And that's the form used for teaching deities, because the deities are not going to listen to a human. I mean, a stinking thing like a human, little human, yes. But this, even in the Pali text, the Buddha is said to have this. One of the suttas has an incident where all the deities are kind of having a little afternoon tea or something, and then they say, "What's that great light on the horizon? We've never seen such a wonderful light coming. What is it? It must be the Buddha coming." So he impressed them even then. And then, since that would be too much for us, because, oh, wow, we couldn't ever be that. I mean, I couldn't be like that. He comes as a human being. And so someone like the Dalai Lama is said to be a Nirmanakaya of the Bodhisattva of compassion, and we can meet him and say, this is a great guy. I mean, when I've met His Holiness, I would say my one big impression was, here is a together human being who isn't easily rattled or put off center, and he was able to go into the press conference and be surrounded by flashing lights and questions and be perfectly calm in the middle of that. And when he thought he'd said enough, he smiled and went away. And they had to say, no, he was out of there. He was gone. He was perfectly sane. And it's difficult to find a human being these days who's perfectly sane, especially in San Francisco, I think. But they're all interconnected. All right.
I think we should probably come to a close. Thank you.
All right, and then I will go for lunch with people, so
Okay, great.
it can be continued. All right.
Announcements. Jack, I'm a host.
I'm the host. If you are hankering for tea or coffee cake, pass them out inside afterwards, and please have your teacup afterwards. And contribute to the Dana Bowl, please, for our expenses, $5 or more. And is there a sign-up sheet out there?
There is a sign up for that. I don't believe anyone here is.
That's
the first time. Yeah.
And then
That is great.
people who would like to go to the lunch in Corless.
I have a.
Is there over
Hmm?
here?
I have Louis Gartenberg asked me to reiterate an announcement he made on the web page that he is inviting anyone to a potluck next Saturday at his home, and this sheet will be out there to discuss setting up a midlife dating group. Yeah, he's pretty eager, but his information, if you're interested, will be out on the table.
What time is that?
6 o'clock. David.
Next week is our GBF refuge ceremony, so please come take refuge in the Buddha's arms.
Okay, let's stand full minute.
May all beings be separated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings be joined to happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings dwell in equanimity with those who are near and those who are far. May all beings find peace, joy, and freedom.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.